Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot Chapter 4, Halacha 1. This is part 4 of this year. Today we're going to be covering a lot of added blessings, like with Mussaf and other things, and it'll give us a deeper understanding for the logic of why the prayers are organized the way they are. Keep in mind, the modern prayers that we have today are done in a way where they're organized and structured by the men of the Great Assembly. Those are the people who came back from Bavel with Ezra, and it was structured where more than half of the people on the Great Assembly were prophets. And you had in there people like Mordechai, you had people like Haggai, you had people like Micha. You had a lot of really amazing prophets in there, and they organized this and structured this, and this has been the way it has been since then. Now, what about prayers before the men of the Great Assembly? Well, people were always praying, and we established that and covered that in the start of chapter 4, Halacha 1, where you can see that with King David and with Daniel. And you can see that they had daily prayer, in fact, even 3 times a day, but that they were using a lot of their own words to say it. Now, I'm sure a lot of what the men of the Great Assembly did was to take a tradition and custom that had been there before and then codify a lot of it, so that a lot of it may have already been before the men of the Great Assembly codified it for everyone else, and a lot of what might have been codified today even goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So you shouldn't necessarily look at it like the men of the Great Assembly made it up and wrote it. A lot of this might have been earlier custom that they're formalizing and hardening because they want to preserve a tradition that has always been. Keep in mind, in that time when the Jews were coming back, Yiddishkeit was very, very weak. So that might have been why they were trying to preserve something that might have been older and earlier customs, like a lot of what we say in the Shemona Esrei and other prayers. Now, this is something where when they're structuring all of these prayers, this is coming through Ruach HaKodesh from that minority of people on the men of the Great Assembly who were not prophets, but the majority of the people on the men of the Great Assembly were prophets, so it means that a lot of this is coming by divine revelation and nevuah. So it's very serious about the structure of this and the way this functions, the way this works, and why we have this. Now, there's going to be another ruling here by Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi regarding another added prayer. Rabbi Simon, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, said, in the case of a Sabbath that falls on Hanukkah, even though there is no Mussaf on an ordinary Hanukkah day, one mentions Hanukkah where it says Al Hanisim in the Mussaf. Now, the Bavli in Shabbos 24a, it also discusses the law in that case, and it records a dispute among the Amorim on that. And it concludes that the Halacha follows the opinion that Hanukkah is mentioned in Mussaf, just like what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying here. Now, why would that dispute come about? It might be because they're trying to discuss the fine points of a law, and a lot of these disputes, it might just be a difference in some small nuance on it, and a lot of times there'll be no disagreement at all, but rather they're discussing what would be in a nuanced case, in a specific nuanced case. Now, the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say that they extended this ruling to a case of Rosh Chodesh, the case of Rosh Chodesh that falls on it in Hanukkah. Now, even though it continues, it says, even though there is no Mussaf on an ordinary Hanukkah day, one mentions Hanukkah in Mussaf. Now, we know that the Al Hanisim is in the Rosh Chodesh Mussaf, and the Noam Yerushalmi suggests that the novelty of this extending this ruling over to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's ruling would be that if the Sabbath falls on Hanukkah, Rosh Chodesh that falls on Hanukkah seems to be incongruous, as Hanukkah always includes a Sabbath and a Rosh Chodesh. So a more precise wording would seemingly have been on the Sabbath of Rosh Chodesh and on the Rosh Chodesh of Hanukkah. So that's a nuance there. Now, the Gemara is going to question another case of dual observances. Okay, so we're just talking about a dual, actually a triple observance, where you have Rosh Chodesh. You can have on that same day, you can have a Shabbat, a Rosh Chodesh, and a Hanukkah. It is possible. Now, you have also where you can have a Hanukkah and a Rosh Chodesh, and you can also have a Hanukkah and a Shabbos. So the Gemara is gonna ask about another case of dual observance. It says, in the case of Rosh Chodesh that falls on a public fast, where does one mention the fast of where it says, Anenu in the Mussaf? So that's going to be a big question. Let's look at the Haredim. The Haredim says that in Shacharis and Mincha of a fast day, the Shliach Zibor inserts Anenu as a separate blessing between the blessings, where it says Goel Yisrael, and where it says Yisrael Rofe Holi Amo, and the individual recites in the blessing where it says Shomea Tefillah, and the question is going to be that in the Mussaf, which does not contain any of these three supplicatory blessings, these blessings of like begging in a way, or asking for divine mercy, where, says the Haredim, does one say Anenu? Now, I want to point out another comment about this. Nowadays, the Ashkenazic practice is for an individual to recite Anenu only during the Mincha. And this custom is of an origin that comes after the Talmud, and it was instituted by the Goanim out of concern that an individual might become ill during the day and not be able to complete his fast. So it would then emerge that he had uttered a falsehood during Shacharis when he said, "Answer us, Hashem, answer us on this day of fast." In other words, what would be happening is in the morning prayer, he's coming and he's declaring a fast, and he's coming and he's saying certain blessings. And then if he failed and he got sick to do it, if he wasn't able to do it and he started it in the Shacharis, then he basically made a false prayer. And so that's why the Goanim, to create offense, moved it from the Shacharis to the Mincha to make sure that you wouldn't have a false thing. In other words, if he knew he was fasting and he started fasting and he said it, and he didn't say it on Shacharis, but he was fasting, right? And then he gets sick from the fast and he doesn't get to Mincha and he has to eat. Well, he didn't say anything that would be a false prayer. So there's no problem. And if he's praying at Mincha and he's going to be praying late in the day where it's almost sunset, so he can, I'm sure he'll have enough strength to finish it, because, he might be praying when there's still redness in the sky on the sunset. And so he's saying something that's true, and so that there's no problem at all. Very, very smart fence set up by the Goanim, and the rabbis always have the power to set up fences, and this is a great example of just what a fence would be. what would this fence be? This is a great case. In other words, you can say it on Shacharis, but they moved it to Mincha to protect people from uttering false prayers. Great insight there. Now, it's going to be three opinions that are going to be presented. Rabbi Zera says, Anenu is recited in the blessing Thanksgiving where it says Modim. Again, we're trying to talk about where would this Anenu go in the Mussaf. So the Rabbi Zera says it would be in the Thanksgiving, where it would be in Modim. Rabbi Abba Bar Mamal says it is recited in the blessing of the temple service, where it says Retzeh. And Rabbi Avina says one recites it as a separate fifth blessing. Now, I want to point out what Rabbi Avina means about this. The other ones are very easy to understand. The Haredim says about this that Rabbi Avina says that the Shliach Sibor recites the Anenu as a separate blessing, okay? And that, basically what this is, that you have the first three blessings. He recites the customary fourth blessing about the holiness of Rosh Chodesh, and afterwards he recites Anenu as a separate fifth blessing. That's what the Haredim is explaining, what Rabbi Avina's point would be. Now, there's going to be another Amarah who's going to elaborate on Rabbi Avina's opinion, because Rabbi Avina's opinion here is a little bit more hard to understand. Rabbi Zera's one is very straightforward. Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel's one is very straightforward, but this one, Rabbi Avina, is a little bit more complicated. So there's going to be another Amarah elaborating about it. Rabbi Abba said, and again, this is about Rabbi Avina's opinion, just as we find in all cases one recites the holiness of Rosh Chodesh as the fourth blessing, here he also recites it as a fourth blessing. Consequently, Anenu is recited as a fifth blessing. So basically, says the Rosh, that this Anenu is basically going to be added to the fourth blessing, and that addition of the Anenu makes it the fifth blessing. So that's a clarification on it. Now, the Gemara is going to conclude, it's going to say, and so an actual case went forth, and it was decided in accordance with Rabbi Abba. In other words, that the sages, a case occurred in which Rosh Chodesh fell on a public fast day, and the sages at the time ruled in accordance with Rabbi Abba, which is basically a clarification of Rabbi Avina's opinion. So you can look at why, it's interesting to look at why it would be by Rabbi Avina and why it wouldn't be the other case. Like, why not, right? So in Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel's point, okay, he recites Anenu and Retzeh, and according to Rabbi Avina, he's holding that the Shliach Sibor recites Anenu as a separate blessing on the communal fast day, but an individual, according to the accepted Halacha, never recites Anenu as a separate blessing, and then he'd be forced to recite Elohe Natsur. He'd have to recite it in there. So, the other question is, what about doing it in as part of the Modim? That's another question. So, if you have a case that says the Haredim, and if the Haredim is stating that the halacha should follow this ruling by Rabbi Abba, but the Gemara is unclear as to which Rabbi Abba the sages ruled in accordance with. In other words, it looks like, when I'm reading it, it looks like it's Rabbi Abba who was quoting in the name of Rabbi Avina, because that's going to be in the order, but it could be Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel, who ruled that Anenu should be recited in the blessing of Reitzeh, but I don't read it that way. I read it as Rabbi Avina, because when they say it's by Rabbi Abba, they were talking about another Rabbi Abba after. However, the Rosh is concluding that the Gemara must mean Rabbi Abba bar Mamel, and otherwise the Gemara would have stated that an incident occurred in accordance with Rabbi Avina. So what it looks like to the casual reader like me is not necessarily the case, and you should always go by the Rosh. In other words, that it looks like that this is what makes the Yerushalmi so difficult to learn, is because it is hard, and it is cryptic and out of order, and grammatically difficult, and the language is difficult, and the structure can be difficult. So it looks like it would be Rabbi Abba, which would be talking about the Rabbi Avina. But in fact, the Rosh is pointing out that no, if the Gemara were concluding that, it would have been pointing out that it would be referring to Rabbi Avina and not Rabbi Abba. So that it's probably going to be, the halacha is probably going to be by Rabbi Abba bar Mamel. So not what it looks like, and you can see that this is a very difficult sugya to understand, and this is why Yerushalmi is not popular to study, but why we should study it, because it helps us to understand our tradition better. Now, the Gemara is going to go on talking about a fast day that would happen to fall on a Rosh Chodesh. And the Gemara says, what Torah portion do we read on that day of the, where the Rosh Chodesh is going to fall on a fast? And the Gemara is going to answer, and it says, Rabbi Yossi says, we read the blessings and the curses. That's going to be the Torah reading of the fast day. Now, on a public fast, when you have a drought or other disaster, the Torah reading consists of the blessings and the curses. That's in Leviticus 26. You can see that it goes from Pasuk 3 to 47. And the idea is to remind us that misfortune is visited on the world as punishment for sins. And the purpose is to inspire people to repent, make tshuva, and to turn away the calamity which caused the fast. That's the idea. Now, another Amara is going to object. Rabbi Mana says to Rabbi Yossi, why do you say that we read the blessings and the curses? Presumably it is in order to inform the people that it is a fast day, but do you really need to be informed of this fact? In other words, the idea here is, says the Haredim, is that the reason that you say the portion of the fast day is to read is read to avoid a problem of some people not realizing they are expected to fast, and even though special prayers are inserted in the Shachris service on a fast day on account of a calamity, people might think that since the Rosh Chodesh Torah portion is read rather than the first day portion, they do not have to fast. So that's basically what Rabbi Mana is going to be asking, to help us to understand that with the Haredim, to help point it out. And in other words, the question is going to really come up, do they really need to be informed that they need to fast on a Rosh Chodesh? That's really going to be the question. The Gemara continues, says, why they lie prostrate on their stomachs recited Tachanun, and they will not realize that it is a fast day. In other words, since they're reciting Tachanun on a fast day, on Rosh Chodesh, which is unusual, as Tachanun is normally admitted on Rosh Chodesh, everyone is going to realize that you have to fast. That's going to be the idea. So in other words, in the Shachris prayer, if you're seeing that, hey, you're saying all this stuff and that's out of order, shouldn't it be obvious to you that you should be fasting as well? That's the idea. And Rabbi Yossi responds. He said to Rabbi Mana in the Gemara that the reason we recite Tachanun is not in order to remind the people to fast, as you assumed in your question. Rather, it is to inform you that we read the Torah portion of the blessings and the curses. In other words, that you have, repentance, and that's going to be the sole reason for the fast, and it's necessary to have the portion be from the blessings and the curses, and that's in order to humble the heart of the person and inspire him to fix his ways so that the disaster should be averted. Now, people might be under the impression that the Rosh Chodesh portion should be read instead. That's the point of Rabbi Yossi. And so he's pointing out that we recite the Tachanun in order to show everybody, the fact that, the reading is going to be from the blessings and the curses, and it's not going to be from the normal reading of the Rosh Chodesh. And so he's saying that it's not to remind the people that they have to fast. He's saying it's to remind everybody you have to read from the other portion of the Torah, not the normal Rosh Chodesh one. So Rabbi Yosef is going to be informed of a dissenting opinion as to which portion is going to be read on Rosh Chodesh when you have a fast. This is only when you have a fast. And Rabbi Yudan of Cappadocia said before Rabbi Yosef, in the name of Rabbi Yudah ben Pazi, we read the portion of Rosh Chodesh, not the portion of the blessings and the curses. Now, Rabbi Yosef is going to try to trace the origin of this dissenting ruling. In other words, he's going to try to know where Rabbi Yudan of Cappadocia got this tradition from. Where is this from? So Rabbi Yosef met Rabbi Yudah ben Pazi, and he said to him, "Did you hear this thing, that the ruling that Rosh Chodesh portion is read from your father?" And he said to Rabbi Yosef, "Father would state this ruling only on Ein Tav, and since the people in that town do not know that it is Rosh Chodesh, he ruled that they should read about Rosh Chodesh even when it coincides with a fast day. But in other places where the populace knows that it is Rosh Chodesh, Father agreed that they read the portion of the blessings and the curses." In other words, what happened was Rabbi Yudan of Cappadocia said something that is true. Okay, he didn't contradict him. He said something that was true. Now, Rabbi Yosef went and asked the son of Rabbi Yudah ben Pazi's, he's the son, and asked, "What did your father say?" Okay, and his father said that, look, there's this town called Ein Tav where they're such Amoratzim. They're so unlearned, okay, that basically if you're going to be having a fast day and it's Rosh Chodesh and you're talking about the blessings and the curses, they're gonna change it, and on every Rosh Chodesh they're basically going to be reading the blessings and the curses because this rabbi basically ruled this way, and they're going to not understand the difference because they're so ignorant and unlearned. That's basically what's going on. So he said, for this group of people in this town who is so simple and unlearned, that just read the Rosh Chodesh one all the time, okay? And it only applies to this town and nowhere else. That's the point. Now, the Gemara, so you see there's no disagreement. They're just clarifying what happened. The Gemara discusses another case involving overlapping obligations for the Torah reading. And Yermiah the scribe inquired of Rabbi Yermiah, when Rosh Chodesh falls on the Sabbath, what Torah portion do we read? In other words, the portion of Rosh Chodesh or the weekly, regular Torah portion. Which are we going to be reading? Now, in other words, it's going to say, do we read the regular weekly parsha, as an ordinary Sabbath, and we read the Rosh Chodesh portion only as the maftir, or you could say, and this would be the question, perhaps the Torah reading on the Sabbath is only from the Rosh Chodesh portion, and the reading of the weekly parsha is suspended for that week? That's the question. So the Berechot says, according to the later opinion, the situation would be similar to when Passover or another Yom Tov falls on the Sabbath, where the law is that only the Yom Tov portion is going to be read, and the reading of the weekly Sabbath portion is going to be deferred until the following Sabbath. So that's going to be, the big question over there. So, which, effectively, which are you going to be reading? So let me read this again. Yerushalmi the scribe inquired of Rabbi Yerushalmi, when Rosh Chodesh falls on the Sabbath portion, what portion do we read? In other words, the portion for Rosh Chodesh or the regular, Torah portion. And Rabbi Yerushalmi said to him, we read only the Rosh Chodesh portion, and the regular weekly Torah portion is deferred until the following Sabbath. So that's going to be, the key point. Korban Ada says that, Rabbi Yerushalmi answered that we, in fact, read only the Rosh Chodesh portion and not the weekly parsha. And, the question is, we interrupt, what is, when we interrupt for, observances, for Rosh Chodesh, what does interrupt mean? That's really going to be the question. So there's a Mishnah in Megillah 3:7, and it says, for all observances, we interrupt the regular reading. For Rosh Chodesh, what does interrupt mean? Is basically going to be the question by the Korban Ada. And in other words, does it mean that, we interrupt the reading of the regular Maftir and the Haftorah, but the reading of the weekly parsha is going to be usual, or, like that? So Gemara is going to support Rabbi Yerushalmi's answer, and Rabbi Chelbo says before Rabbi Ami, and a Mishnah states so as well, for all observances we interrupt the regular reading for Rosh Chodeshim, for Hanukkah, and for Purim. So this Mishnah, which again we just said is Megillah 3:7, implies that we do not read the weekly portion on Rosh Chodesh, even when it falls on the Sabbath. For the Mishnah states its rule categorically for all Rosh Chodesh occurrences. So the Haredim says that when, just like the weekly portion is certainly replaced by the Rosh Chodesh reading when Rosh Chodesh falls on a weekday, that's going to be Monday or Thursday, there's going to be no Haftorah, on that day. And so too, we read the weekly portion. So too, the weekly portion is entirely replaced when Rosh Chodesh falls on the Sabbath. So there's going to be a dissenting view on that. Sorry. There's going to be a different case where you have overlapping needs of the Torah reading. Okay, so not exactly a dissent, just overlapping needs. So Yitzhak Sahora inquired of Rabbi Yitzhak, when Rosh Chodesh falls on Hanukkah, what do we read? In other words, what it's saying is, how do we combine the Torah readings for Rosh Chodesh and Hanukkah? Again, every Hanukkah is going to have at least one Sabbath in it and one Rosh Chodesh. So what's going to happen with the Torah reading then? So Rabbi Yitzhak replies, 3 people are called up to read from the Rosh Chodesh passage first, and then 1 person is called up to read the Hanukkah portion. Now there's going to be a dissent here. Rabbi Pinchas and Rabbi Simon say, and Rabbi Abba bar Zemina inclined to quote in the name of Rabbi Avdima of Haifa, 3 people are called up to read from the Hanukkah passage first, and then 1 person is called to read up from the Rosh Chodesh passage. What is the reason? It is to inform you that the 4th person came only because of Rosh Chodesh. So the idea here is that, says this today, Yeshua, is if we call up 3 people to read the Rosh Chodesh passage, as Rabbi Yitzchak says, people will not realize that the 4th person is being called up only because it is Rosh Chodesh. It is therefore preferable to call up 3 people to read the Hanukkah passage, even though this is against the principle of Tidor Sainenu Tadir Kodem, so that the fourth person could read the Rosh Chodesh passage. So there's going to be another difficulty with this opinion. Bar Shalemya Safra questions Rabbi Manna, and he says, think about it. Where Rosh Chodesh of Hanukkah falls on a Sabbath, they do not read 7 portions from the Rosh Chodesh passage. In other words, with the Hanukkah passage being read only as maftir, thus we can see effectively, what this is pointing out, that on the Sabbath of Rosh Chodesh, the reading precedes the Hanukkah reading. So the Gemara says, can you then reasonably say that when Rosh Chodesh Teves falls on a weekday, we call up 3 people for the Hanukkah portion first, because the fourth person comes only because of Rosh Chodesh, and Bar Shalemya concludes, and he says, I asked this question to all of the scholars, but none of them could give me an answer. That's going to be a big chiddush. And Rabbi Manna responds, and he says to Bar Shalemya, now that is a question befitting a scholar. In other words, your question is extremely strong and refutes the opinion of Rabbi Pinchas and Rabbi Simon, or Rabbi of Dumi of Haifa. So we have to concur with Rabbi Yitzhak that 3 people are called up for the Rosh Chodesh passage first, and a fourth person is called up for the Hanukkah passage. So what's the idea here? So the Sidei Yeshua explains what's going on so that we can all understand it. It says that when Rosh Chodesh Hanukkah falls on the Sabbath, in which case there are 7 aliyot, Rabbi Pinchas and Rabbi Simon certainly cannot apply the rule of in order to inform you. Rather, in that case, even they concede that the Rosh Chodesh passage is read before the Hanukkah passage, in accordance with the rule that a more frequent ritual takes precedence over a less frequent ritual. And since on the Sabbath Rosh Chodesh, that portion is going to be read first, we should be consistent and read the Rosh Chodesh passage first on the weekday as well, and then the Hanukkah passage. So the idea being that we go by what is frequently done first, and then what is less commonly done second. And so that's how we would understand this for this case about the reading of the Parshiot as well, that the Hanukkah one comes around once a year, but a Sabbath Rosh Chodesh is going to be more frequent. And so that would be the order. Now, the Mishnah is going to move on, and it's going to talk about the evening prayer. And the Gemara says the evening prayer, from the Mishnah, the evening prayer has no fixed time. The Gemara now is going to cite a ruling regarding Marav. Rebbe instructed Amnon, his speaker, announce to the public, one who prays it may pray the prayer of the evening, that's going to be the Marav, while the sun is still up. Now, here's the point. The point is that because Marav is elective, one may rely on the view of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah that Mincha must be recited before Plag HaMincha, which in turn means that Marav may be recited immediately after Plag HaMincha. Okay, now that's going to be the ruling by Rebbe, and Rebbe is basically going to be relying on the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so there's going to be another sage who also rules likewise. It says that Rabbi Chia Barva also instructed his speakers, announce to the public, one who prays it may pray the prayer of the evening prayer while the sun is still up. And an Amarah attempts to prove that yet a third sage occurs with this leniency. Rabbi Hanina said, Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, once drew me near a certain inn, and he said to me, here our father, this is going to be talking about Rabbi Yossi, once prayed the prayer of the evening, Sabbath Eve, in other words, Friday night Marv, on Erev Shabbos, in other words, basically while the sun was still up. And this story proves basically that Rabbi Yossi sanctioned praying Marv before sunset. Now, there's going to be an Amarah who disagrees with Rabbi Hanina's proof here, and Rabbi Ami says to him, Rabbi Yochanan disputes Rabbi Hanina's conclusion. In other words, he's arguing that Rabbi Yossi might have prayed Marv early just that one time because of some, urgent need. Doesn't mean that Rabbi Yossi regularly prayed Marv before sunset. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is disputing Rabbi Hanina's conclusion that Rabbi Yossi would regularly pray Marv there. In other words, nobody's disputing that everybody saw him pray at that inn there once, but that he might have, the point of Rabbi Yochanan is he might have had a pressing need and have done it one time, not as a regular thing. So Rabbi Ami is going to come back and comment on it. And he's going to say, but Rabbi Yochanan should not have disputed this conclusion of Rabbi Hanina by saying that Rabbi Yossi acted as he did only because of an unusual circumstance. Why? And the Goan continues, says, for Rabbi Hanina's report referred to Friday night Marv, which everyone might agree may have been regularly recited before dark, because we add from the weekday to the holy to accept the sanctity of the Sabbath before dark. And Rabbi Yossi might, in fact, have regularly recited the Friday night Marv early, but that would not prove that he would have done so or condoned it for early Marv on other nights. And the Gemara says that furthermore, we know of a precedent for praying Marv early on Friday nights. And the Gemara says that for donkey drivers would regularly leave Arab for Tziporin. Now, Arab is going to be a town in Galilee, and that's going to be a few miles northeast of Tziporin. And the Gemara says that for donkey drivers would regularly leave Arab for Tziporin and would relate when they arrive. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa has already rested. In other words, has already accepted the Sabbath in the city. So basically, donkey drivers would travel from Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's town in Arab up to Tziporin, which was at the top of a nearby mountain, and they would report that before they left, they saw Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa pray the Friday night Marv prayer along with his congregation in the synagogue. And since the donkey drivers still had time to travel to Tziporin before the Sabbath, basically, it's showing that, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa has prayed Friday night Marv before the dark. And so in other words, basically what they're saying is that there's no need to say that Rabbi Yossi prayed Marv early only that one time because of some unavoidable circumstance. In other words, that here you see Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa is sitting there praying while there's still daylight in the Friday night. So maybe Rabbi Yossi did as well. Rabbi Ami concludes, and this says, and this basically is forcing him to conclude, that if Rabbi Yossi stated some disagreement, it was about the following statement of Rabbi Hanina. And the Gemara says, for Rabbi Hanina said, Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi, once drew me near a certain inn, and he said to me, here, Father prayed the prayer of Motzei Shabbos on the Sabbath. In other words, that, this is going to be where an incident where Rabbi Yossi is reporting as having prayed the Friday night Marv on Friday afternoon, whereas in the present story, he is said to have prayed the Motzei Shabbos Marv on the Sabbath afternoon. Now, Rabbi Hanina concludes from the story that Rabbi Yossi sanctioned praying Marv before sunset, and it was this conclusion that Rabbi Yochanan disputed, arguing that Rabbi Yosei might have prayed Maariv early just at one time because of a compelling need, but the story does not prove that Rabbi Yosei sanctioned praying Maariv before sunset on a regular basis. And Rabbi Ami concludes that, even regarding this report, that Rabbi Yochanan should not have disagreed, for Rebbe instructed Abdan, his speaker, to announce to the public, one who prays it may pray the prayer of the evening while the sun is still up. And Rabbi Chia Barva likewise instructed his speaker, announced to the public, one who prays it may pray the prayer of the evening while the sun is still up. In other words, since these announcements were not limited to just Sabbath Maariv prayer, we can conclude that it is allowed and permissible to regularly recite Maariv before dark. Now, the Gemara is going to give another basis of this elective nature of the Maariv prayer. And the Gemara says that those of the Academy of Rabbi Yanai say, if a person climbed into his bed for the night and then realized he forgot to recite the Maariv, we do not trouble him to descend and to pray. Now, this is going to be coming up where, what about, is this going to be elective or not? And we're actually going to get up to a famous story tomorrow, and we're going to find out about a story about Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, whether it's going to be elective or not. But meanwhile, there's a dissenting view about this. In other words, that the Haredim is pointing out that since Maariv would be elective, he is not going to be inconvenienced to get out of bed and pray. The Bavli in Shabbos 9b states a similar ruling regarding somebody who unfastened his belt to eat. In that case, we do not trouble him to recite it. This is all not necessarily going to be halacha lamaisa. This is going to be for establishing what are we going to be doing today. And there's going to be a dissenting view. Rabbi Zera says, whenever I would do so, in other words, when I would skip Maariv because I reminded myself after I've already climbed into bed and I forgot to pray, basically. Rabbi Zera says that I would be terrified at night by nightmares. And he says, hence, you do not have any leniency regarding Maariv other than what Rebbe instructed Avdan, his speaker, announced to the public, one who prays it may pray the prayer of the evening while the sun is still up, and what Rabbi Chia Barba likewise instructed the speaker, announced to the public, one who prays it may pray the prayer of the evening while the sun is still up. In other words, since Maariv is elective, one may be lenient and recite it before dark, but Maariv may not be omitted because of an inconvenience. In other words, you still have to do it. The only leniency here is that you can do it while the sun is up. Now, I want to point out that there might not be actually much of a disagreement, and that those of the Academy of Rabbi Yonai are basically saying that if a person forgot to do it, that they're probably going to allow him to do it while he's in the bed. But the point by Rabbi Zera is that nobody's allowed to omit it. Now, the Tosafot in Yoma 87b is saying that even according to the view that Maariv is elective, Maariv may not be omitted without cause. Rather, we hold a view. That view holds that if there's a particular reason to omit it, one has some other mitzvah to perform at that time, or there's some special effort that would be required in order to pray, one may skip the Maariv. But the Haredim is pointing out that Rabbi Zera is concluding that someone who is accustomed to pray Maariv should not neglect it because of a mere inconvenience. The only leniency is that you can do it a little bit earlier. That's the leniency. Now, tomorrow we're going to get about this very famous story with Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, whether it's elective or not. You have to do Maariv every day in your life, and you're allowed to say it during the sun. but you have to say it. You have to follow the laws of what the sages put down. We always have to follow Shulchan Aruch. We always have to learn the Shulchan Aruch so we can know what are we supposed to be doing. What is the halacha, l'maisa? Anyway, have a great day, and we're going to get into a great story tomorrow. Thank you.